And it's Thursday morning in Jasper, Alabama. We're live at 9 with James Phillips on WJLX 101.5 FM. And this morning, my guest is from East Walker County, Mr. Tim Hollis, who is an author, a historian, known for the Hollis Museum in Dora, and all the different books and things that you've written.
I always tell people, if they look up my name on Google, they will find more about me than they ever wanted to know.
Right.
Yeah, everything you wanted to know about Tim Hollis, but you didn't know you wanted to know it.
Right, and this weekend you've got a special weekend because you're opening up the museum, which is usually open for appointments if somebody wants to come by.
People can make an appointment anytime, but this is a special event this weekend.
Well, and tell the listeners a little bit about the museum, what it is, what it includes.
Well, we have a caller calling in
already.
They're already. That's my fans there. No, the museum, it doesn't really have a name. I said if Jim Reed downtown hadn't already come up with the Museum of Fond Memories, which is what he calls his store, that was probably the name I would have picked for it.
Right, yeah.
But no, the museum, it has just about every aspect of pop culture history you can imagine. A lot of it is old toys, games, puzzles, things like that. But then it has a recreated grocery store with the old products on the shelves. There's a section for every holiday, Christmas, Halloween, Easter. There are parts that deal with tourism, with the old souvenirs and brochures and promotional items like that. And then there are some parts that are just kind of hard to classify.
Right.
They're just there.
And I guess one common thing throughout the collection is that it's really, as you said, fond memories, but it's kind of your fond memories of,
that's how it started.
Of your childhood.
Yes, what I like to say is that I started out to preserve my own memories, and I found out that I was preserving everyone else's memories at the same time. Because if you're a certain age, like if you are in your 50s, 60s, 70s, what I found is that it's kind of strange that there was such a long period of time that things didn't change that much as far as pop culture was concerned. A person who was born in 1953 and a person who was born in 1963 are going to have many of the same memories. They'll relate to the same kinds of things. But a person that was born in 1963 and a person who was born in 1973 are not going to have anything in common
right.
as far as their memories are concerned.
Well, now it's like if somebody was born in 2010 and somebody was born in 2012, they've almost,
that's right.
That's how different things can be in a year now.
I say that for a long time things didn't change, but once they did start changing, it happened fast.
Right.
The world of 1971 and the world of 1975 are two completely different worlds, really.
Yeah, definitely.
And but I try to preserve something from all of those different eras. People say, "Do you have a cutoff date?" I really don't, but I would, as far as my memories are concerned, I pretty much cut it off in 1980.
Right.
Because that was the year that I graduated from high school. And when you graduate from high school, your childhood is over with.
Whether you want it to be or not.
High school students don't like to think of themselves as still being children, but they are.
Right.
Yeah, you're a child until you get out of high school. And, of course, we know some people who never did get out of being a child.
Right. Both of us may be in that category. I'm not sure.
Yes.
Now, what you were talking about other people who have memories when they come through, and before we came on the air, we were talking about, you said one person came through and was in tears because they saw something that reminded them of what had been hanging in their nursery.
Yeah,
when they were
a lady saw a wall decoration in there, and she just burst out crying.
Wow!
She said, that was over my bed in my nursery, and she said, I haven't even thought about it since then.
Yeah.
And I get that a lot, not just that one thing, but there are all kinds of things in the museum that they'll hit people unaware. I've said that I don't think I don't think anyone realizes what a powerful drug nostalgia is, especially if you don't live with it all the time. Now, I came from a family that preserved everything
Right.
about our background, and so I said it's sort of like I've been vaccinated against it because I've always lived with it.
Yeah.
But for people that I know in working on my books, I'll ask people, I'll say, do you have any photos or souvenirs from when you went to Florida on your vacations as a kid? And they'll say, well, I don't know. They said, if I do, my parents probably still have them. Well, you see, I've always had it.
Right.
I mean, number one, I've lived in the same house all my life, so the stuff never went anywhere. It's always been right there. But I realize that a lot of people they don't have that experience that I've had.
Right. Well, and what are some of your favorite things in the museum? And I know there's too many to really pinpoint, but
I mean, obviously my favorite things would be the stuff that we kept from when I was a kid.
yeah.
I mean, my baby bed is in there.
When you told me the
same
typewriter that you learned to
the
type
typewriter
on.
that I learned how to type on is in there with the first piece of paper I ever typed.
Wow.
That my mom saved and wrote the date on it a couple of weeks before I turned 5 years old. And so, I don't even remember typing that piece of paper.
Right, yeah.
But she thought it was going to lead to something. And so I have the typewriter and that piece of paper on a desk with the 40 other books that I've written.
Yeah. I mean, to me, that's amazing.
I like to say that was where it started and the books are where it ended up.
Right,
So it's
yeah.
all in one location.
And it was, most parents keep a memory book, or they may hang some of their children's artwork on the refrigerator or
Yeah.
something like that. But your mom was keeping.
My mom kept it in folders and put dates on it and all of that kind of stuff. And of course, another advantage that I had was being an only child, because I've heard a lot of people say that if you're the first child or an only child, that's where all of your stuff, your parents preserve it. But the further down the line you went, the less and less
Oh, yeah.
got preserved because your parents were kind of over it.
That's definitely true. And the older your parents get, the more they don't want to deal with that stuff.
Yeah.
I can say that in my own life because I have 5 children.
Yeah.
And the first one, we've got all the pictures
Right.
and the memory book is filled out. The fifth one, I don't think there's even a word written in the memory book,
Yeah, I've come across that a lot. And of course, I have the memory book. My dad was the one who kept up with that. And of course, he had this beautiful handwriting. I mean, his longhand is just a joy to read.
Yeah.
And because I never knew why he did this, but I guess it's because the memory book, the title on the front says all about me, and like the pre-printed topics in it are like my first birthday, my first Christmas. So my dad wrote it in first person as if it were me.
Oh, there you
talking, from like my first Christmas. He'll say, I got up at such and such a time and went down and saw the Christmas tree, and so it's kind of unique the way that he wrote that. He wrote it as if it were me relating the whole thing.
And your dad was a educator, right?
Yeah, he taught at Bagley for about 40-something years. Before I was old enough to remember it, he taught arithmetic, but I don't remember him as a math teacher. I remember him as an English and literature teacher.
Okay.
But people think that he is the one that I got my writing from, but really not, because my dad, he was a great teacher. I mean, I'm always running into people that talked about him being their favorite teacher and all, but my dad did not have a creative bone in his body. He could not have made up a story if his life had depended on it.
Right.
I think the reason he was so good at writing the memory book is because he was documenting what was happening at the time.
It was just a first person take on it.
And he was writing it at the time.
Yeah, he was reporting.
Yeah, he wasn't remembering. He was reporting.
Yeah.
That's a good way of putting it. And so now my mom, she was more creative than my dad was, but my mom had very little formal education. And I've always wondered just what she could have done if she had gone on to high school and college and all of that, because she had most of the same interests that I did. She was fascinated by entertainment history. She said as a girl growing up in the late 30s and early 40s, she got all of the movie magazines, the radio magazines, and of course when television came along, she kept all of that stuff. So I really think that with more education, she might have ended up writing the same kind of material that I ended up writing.
Right. Yeah. Now, tell us a little bit more about what people will find in the museum. Some specifics as far as I know. There's toys, games, puzzles.
Yeah.
Like what are
Fast
some
food memorabilia, the advertising stuff from them and all. It would be almost easier to say what you wouldn't find in it. Like you were talking about collecting the Star Wars toys. Now I don't have the first piece of Star Wars memorabilia in the museum. That was just not a part of my interest growing up. But I do have sections that weren't necessarily related to me. Like before we went on the air, I mentioned that when I started having a lot of visitors, I discovered that I didn't have a lot of stuff that girls would have grown up with.
right?
So I started what I call the girly section, which is the merchandise and the other toys that were based on Barbie and all of the other doll characters that came out over the years. I don't collect the dolls because that's a whole other realm of collecting there. But it's fun to see the merchandise that was based on them. And of course, up into the early 80s, you had all of these characters merchandise like Rainbow Bright,
Right.
Strawberry Shortcake, and ones like that. That their whole purpose was to sell an entire line.
Yeah, and they had their own friends. You know, each one of them had a different.
Rainbow Bright had a character based on every color.
Right. And Strawberry Shortcake was different.
All the different berries.
Yeah.
And then of course even earlier than that, you had characters like Holly Hobby that were merchandised. So, and one thing that I learned while collecting that I didn't know at that time, and I'm sure a lot of people thought this too, I thought that Holly Hobby was the name of the little girl with the big sun bonnet. You never saw her face. It was always just the bonnet and all.
Right.
No, Holly Hobby was the name of the lady, the artist who created that stuff.
Yeah.
So, but I thought that was a character, but no, that was the artist's name.
Right.
Kind of like Laura Frank, who did all the neon kind of stuff and all of that, So sometimes a person's name can become a brand name like that.
And it's even more than toys and merchandise for toys and things like that. You said you have a lot of restaurant type history. You've always been fascinated with advertising, it seems, too.
Oh yeah, when I first started collecting, of course, like I said, the main thing was to preserve my own memories, but then I also decided that I wanted to collect advertising memorabilia. And it overlapped because when you get someone like Colonel Sanders, he's both,
right?
Nostalgia and advertising. Some of my older KFC merchandise came from the fellow here in Jasper who was the franchisee for so long, Earl Forrester. Some people may remember him. He gave me a lot of early stuff, and of course, and he knew Colonel Sanders personally.
Right.
And Colonel Sanders actually lived here in Jasper.
Well, I knew he had a history in Jasper for a while.
His first wife was from Jasper.
Okay.
And one of his early jobs on the railroad was on the rail line between Jasper and Parrish. That was his.
Right.
So he had a big history with Jasper, and I guess that's how he and Mr. Forrester got to know each other so well. But yeah, so like I said, if a person is of a certain age, they're going to find something in the museum that means something to them. Right,
and I know a lot of your history that you've talked about in the past too have been even old stores like Pizzitt's in Birmingham,
right?
But we were talking before we went on the air, and you were talking about some things that you have that came from stores in downtown Jasper that people probably my age have no idea about. But
like I said, there was one of the things that I found when I was putting the museum together. My mom had saved a little Paul Parrott shoebox, and it has a price tag on it from the old Hayes store in downtown Jasper. And on the inside of that box is a little pair of booties, and she had pinned a note to them. It says "First Shoes and Socks." It's like, my mom was labeling things as a museum exhibit while I was still a baby.
Yeah. And I bet that's the first time that some people who are listening right now have maybe even ever heard of the Hayes store.
Right.
Or it's the first time in 40 years that they've thought about it.
Now, one time when I was in downtown Jasper, I saw the old Hayes building, and the name was still on the door handles. So I don't know in renovations if they've managed to preserve that or not.
Now, do you remember off the top of your head which building that is or where it's at downtown?
It's close to the square.
Okay.
But I don't remember exactly which building it is. It's real close to the DMV office in that general area.
Gotcha. Yeah.
But yeah, of course, we did most of our shopping in downtown Birmingham, Pizette's, Loveman's, Sears, and all of that. And one of my big obsessions every Christmas at Pizette's was when they had the Enchanted Forest up on the 6th floor, where you'd walk the trail through the snow and the trees and all of that. And one of the things that people always notice in the museum, I have the moose that was in the Enchanted Forest. He's a huge animated moose.
Oh, wow.
That I think they introduced that moose in about 1976 or so.
I do not remember the Enchanted Forest. I bet I went. I was born in 78, so
okay.
I bet I went at some point when I was really small.
82 was the last year they had it, so you would have been very, very young.
I do remember
when they stopped it.
My vivid Christmas memories were Century Plaza as a child. And they had a lot of Disney characters in their Christmas setup, and it was always so neat. And I loved going there every year.
No one ever discovered what became of the Century Plaza decorations. When they demolished it, they might have still been in there somewhere.
Wow, I hope not.
You just never know. But now some of the Century Plaza decorations were ones they had gotten from Pizette's, from the Enchanted Forest. They had a set of penguins. Animated penguins that they used right up until the end, and I assume they might have been in there when it was torn down. I really don't know.
Yeah, I hate that we lost those things because it was such a vivid memory for me in my childhood.
The fellow who designed the Enchanted Forest all those years, Pizette's display director, was a fellow named Jim Luker, and he and I actually started corresponding when I was 9 years old. And I wrote a letter to the store asking about, who's responsible for the forest and how it came about and all of that. And he and I kept up a correspondence all the way up until he died just maybe 3 or 4 years ago.
Wow, that's interesting.
But I went to see him. By that time, he had moved to South Carolina, and he had a whole series of strokes where he was blind and he couldn't talk very well anymore. But his wife wanted me to come out and see him, and so I went to South Carolina at the first opportunity I had, and we had the best visit.
Yeah.
He was, and it's kind of funny because the more we talked about his past with Pizette's and some of the people that he worked with, he started laughing, and the more he laughed, the clearer his speech became.
Right.
It's like when people say laughter is the best medicine, it really is. Because, he and his wife, they laughed, and it just really, afterwards, she said that I would never know what that visit did for him.
Well, and I was going to say, I'm sure his job gave him so much joy over the years, and to see somebody who was affected by what he did, like you were, that would make you feel great.
That's great. And he always admitted that the Enchanted Forest was his favorite part of his whole job. Because he had to do display work all year round, but that was his absolute favorite part.
Yeah.
And there's something that he told a newspaper reporter. They were doing an article about Christmas in Birmingham, and I put them in touch with him. And he told that reporter something that he had never told me in all of the years that we had corresponded. He said that every year, after I saw that year's forest, I would write him a letter, and I would say, I think this really looked great. Now this, I thought you were kind of getting away from the I would tell him what I liked and what I didn't like about him. And he said he would take those letters and he would share them with his staff. He would say, now, this is someone that knows what they're talking about. Take this and use it next year.
Yeah.
Now, I knew that some of the things I suggested the next year there they would be, but I didn't realize that I was actually directing what was happening.
Well, your mind was the key demographic. That's what they were going for, you know.
I guess that's what it was, but he never told me any of that.
That's
he told
really
it to the
interesting.
reporter.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Oh, boy.
Well, I want to remind everybody we're talking to Tim Hollis. He's a local historian and author who lives in Dora, and he's got a open house coming up this weekend at his museum at the Hollis Museum.
I guess we might need to tell them where it is.
Yeah, we do. We do need to tell them it's on Sharon Boulevard, right as you first turn on Sharon Boulevard.
If you know where Sides Furniture is and the Dollar General, I'm sandwiched in between the two of them.
There you go. So between Sides and Dollar General, there.
From the outside, it's just a house.
Yeah. Now, will you have signs up so people know?
Yeah,
Okay.
we'll have signs up. They'll need to. On Saturday, they'll need to park across the street at the shopping center or maybe at Dollar General.
Right.
On Sunday, Sides lets us use their parking lot because they're not open on Sunday, so we're not taking space away from any of their paid customers.
Right. And remember, it is going to be a $5 charge, and all those funds go to animal shelters,
Animal rescue.
to be able to provide supplies for different animal shelters and rescues in the area.
And one thing that I like to, I don't think anyone's ever taken advantage of this, but the museum, it's available for other fundraisers throughout the year. We're getting close to the time that the cheerleaders are going to need to start raising money.
Right.
Football teams are going to have to start raising money. And, if I just turn the museum over to these people, that's a whole lot easier than doing a car wash.
Right, right.
Or standing at the intersection with a bucket collecting money.
So they could just have a day where all museum guests, the funds go to them. That's what
they can promote it. They can get people to come to it, and I don't take anything from it. I don't take any kind of a percentage from it or anything.
Right.
So that's something for all the pep clubs and all of that to think about.
Well, it's 9:30 right now, so we're going to take a quick break, and then when we come back, we'll talk some more about the history of the museum, and I have some personal memories of your house from growing up as a kid and seeing the decorations and things like that. We'll bring that up as well. So we'll be right back here on Live at 9 with James Phillips here on WJLX. And we're back on Live at 9 with James Phillips here on WJLX 101.5 FM. And this morning, reminding you that we are joined by Tim Hollis. He's a local historian and author who has the Hollis Museum there in Dora on Sharon Boulevard. And before we went to break, I was mentioning to you, Tim, that I have memories of your house as a child at certain holidays. At Halloween, we would come trick-or-treating at your house every year.
That's right.
And usually, I guess it was you and your dad would be dressed up and would give out candy to kids and try to scare them a little bit.
Yeah, and that actually started when I was in elementary school. I would have friends that would come and help me out with that. We called it the haunted carport. And in the museum is actually the decorations and the signage from the haunted carport. They're still in there.
Oh, that's neat.
And
you always gave away the best candy and like whole apples, like it was always a good treat.
I honestly don't remember what we gave away, but I remember that we would try to scare them a little bit. Toward the end, I had a Dr. Frankenstein outfit that I would wear, and I would hand out the candy, and I'd be saying, oh, "I'm so glad you came to my laboratory because I needed someone for my next experiment."
I completely remember that.
And about that time, while they were holding out their candy bag, I'd grab them by the wrist, and hang on to them. "Yes, I know you're planning on staying here with me." And so that was always fun. You couldn't do that now. You would get sued for touching them,
grabbing the child.
Yeah. Of course, it was fun when it was a teenage girl.
Right. And scare them to death.
Yeah, boy.
Now I do remember also as at Christmas time, and I bet a lot of people in East Walker County remember your house at Christmas time because it would constantly have all those shaped
The blow molds.
Blow
They call them
molds,
the
that's
lighted
what they are.
plastic decorations.
And
yeah.
I mean, it was just from the beginning of from the end of the street all the way to the house.
Right.
And I'm sure that, I forget what year you stopped doing that, but I'm sure it got to where it was just so much to do.
Yeah, we started that in 1970 by adding the reindeer, and it just kept up from then until I think 2009 was the last year that I did any of that, because by that point I was just getting too old to do that kind of work, and the decorations were getting too old.
Right.
To be out in the weather like that, because that plastic wasn't made to hold up for that many years.
Right. Well, and it was only made for a season.
Yeah, pretty much.
It would make it multiple seasons.
Back then the decorations were more durable than they are now.
Definitely so.
But some of them are in the museum. I don't have room to display all of them, but I still have all of it.
Right. Yeah.
But not all of it is on public display.
What was your favorite ones? Do you have a?
Oh, the reindeer, because
Yeah.
those were one we started with. And
Yeah.
after just a couple of years, my uncle took an extra reindeer and converted it into Rudolph.
Okay.
So
yeah.
he could have the bulb in his nose.
I
and all
remember
of that.
seeing the red bulb and
Yeah,
everything. And
yeah.
and for people who never saw your yard at Christmas time, just imagine the Griswolds' house on Christmas vacation and times that by about 100, and it's a lot cooler. You know.
The main difference is that we didn't decorate with lights very much. It was
Right.
the figures.
Yeah, it was the figures.
Because
and that-
neither my dad nor I were crazy about climbing up on a ladder to put lights on the house or anything.
Right.
We would put lights on. We had a pine tree in the corner of the yard that my dad would decorate with lights, and now that tree is taller than the house, so it's still there, but it couldn't be decorated
But
anymore.
as a child, the figures are what stood out anyway. You know,
Yeah.
everybody had lights,
Right.
but these were all the figures of my childhood were out there.
And
you
for
know.
a few years, I would put on a Santa Claus suit, and I would stand out at the end of the driveway and wave at the traffic, and that was always fun. A lot of people thought it was my dad, but he never wore the Santa Claus
Yeah, because
suit. That was always me.
I thought it was your dad also.
Yeah, you probably sat on my lap.
I probably did at some point. I probably did. Now it was a big memory for me and my brother growing up to come by there and see the lights and to do the trick or treating. Now, you know, we're on the radio today, so I've got to ask you. I know you've got some music history in your background there too. What's your favorite music? Like what?
Well, that's kind of hard to say. I mean, most of the records that are in the museum are the children's records. You know, I did a whole book on the history of the Disney record label.
That's what I thought. Yeah.
And you know, so I grew up with the Disney records, the Little Golden records, the Peter Pan records, all of those labels. But I like to say that there's probably something in every genre of music that I like. There's probably no genre that I like everything.
Right.
You know, I don't like every country song. I don't like every disco song, but there's some of all of it that I
I bet
can
you like
appreciate.
Disco Duck, didn't you?
That was one. Yeah. I remember when that came out. And that fella had a background in Birmingham, Rick Dees.
Oh yeah,
Because
that's right.
he was with WSGN in Birmingham, and by the time he did that record, he had moved to Memphis. But the station in Memphis wouldn't play Disco Duck because it would have been a conflict of interest, him being one of their own disc jockeys.
Okay, that makes
and
sense.
of course, no other station in Memphis would play it because he was the competition.
They didn't want to promote another disc jockey.
WSGN is the first station in the country that played Disco Duck.
Okay.
He sent it to them, and they said, "Oh yeah, this is one of our guys. He used to be here." So they played the record, and that's how it became a hit.
Yeah, I remember Disco Duck, and then you know, of course, the Chipmunks. They always
yeah.
had music, and there was a Snoopy song that I loved as a kid about the Red Bear.
Yeah, Snoopy versus the Red Baron. That was a big hit in
Yeah.
around 1968 or so.
Okay.
And then that group, the Royal Guardsmen, they did several Snoopy records. In fact, on one of my most recent antiquing trips, I found what I think was the last Snoopy record they did. It was called Snoopy for President.
Oh, really?
And yeah, that was not too easy to find because that was the first time I had seen it in all those years. But they were a group out of Florida, strangely enough.
Okay, yeah,
But,
that makes sense. And you know, you're a big Disney fan, and I know that you've written the book on Disney World, really.
Well, on Disney Records, yeah.
But what was some of the most popular Disney records that we may not think of? I mean, we know from the cartoons and that sort of thing, but they put out so much stuff.
Well, that's right. And, of course, around the same time as Disco Duck, they did the Mickey Mouse Disco album.
Okay, see, I've never heard that.
That was in 1979. And that album went double platinum. It sold so many copies of that. And the Disney record label was sort of on its way down when that one came out, and it just kind of revitalized the whole market for Disney vinyl records. And of course, in the 80s, they stopped doing vinyl records and went to cassettes and then CDs and all of that.
Yeah.
But doing that book was a lot of fun, getting to know the performers and the writers and the producers that worked on all of those records. It was just great.
Now, and you said you've written how many books now?
40.
40 books.
Yeah.
Anything you're working on now, or?
No, after doing 40 books in rapid succession with hardly a break in between them, I'm sitting it out for a while.
Yeah.
that was a nice even number. And so right now, no, I'm not working on anything.
And we talked earlier about your typewriter that you learned to type on. Did you always think I'm going to be a writer? Was that kind of your?
Yeah, I knew that I was either going to be a writer or a cartoonist, and I discovered that I was better at writing than I was at drawing. So really, the only time that I draw anymore is like connected with the web TV series I did, the one called The Weird World of Tim Hollis, which people can still, we're on hiatus right now, but people can still see that one by going to, I think it's TimHollisWeirdWorld.com.
Okay, yeah.
And they'll see our episodes on there. So drawing my own characters for things like that was really the only cartooning I do anymore. But talking about the writing is kind of funny, but Jim Luker, the fellow at Pizitz, the Enchanted Forest fellow, we didn't meet in person until I was in college and we'd been corresponding since I was 9 years old. And finally, when I was taking mass communication courses at UAB, I had to do an article of some sort, and I went to Pizitz and met with him in his office. And that was the first time that we had ever met or even talked on the phone.
Wow, yeah.
And I remember Jim asking me, he said, I've always wondered about this. He said, you started writing to me when you were 9 years old. He said, all of those letters I got from you, he said, did you actually type those letters yourself, or did you dictate them to one of your parents? And I said, no, I always typed everything that I ever wrote. He said, I figured that much. He said, any kid that was capable of asking the kind of questions that you asked was perfectly capable of typing their own letters.
Right. And so, people don't see people, now it's laptops and everything. But I remember when I first started in the newspaper business, going, and I was a sports writer, going to Alabama games, people still use typewriters then.
But what I amaze kids with when they see that typewriter, when people bring their kids to the museum, I like to point out to the kids that the keyboard on that typewriter is exactly the same as the keyboard on a laptop or any other computer. That has never changed.
Yeah, thankfully they have not changed that. And I learned to type at Dora High School in a keyboarding class on a typewriter. And I'm glad I still, they never changed the keyboards. Cause
one little boy had an interesting question. I'd never thought about this before, but he was looking at the old typewriter and the keys that were on it. And he said, but wait a minute. He said, why is there a key with the @ symbol on it? They didn't have email back then.
Right.
And I said, no. I said, he didn't understand that the @ symbol actually existed before there was such a thing as email.
Right. And what everybody calls the hashtag now was the pound symbol.
That's right. The number
right.
symbol.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I always say for people that bring kids and teenagers, it's an educational experience because these kids they've never seen anything like the Viewmasters.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Viewmaster is still on the market, but the reels don't have the little modeled figures of Charlie Brown and Snoopy and all of that where you can look, like you're looking at them.
Yeah.
Of course, it was kind of sad. There was this one little 9-year-old girl not too long ago. I said, now, if you'll look through here, you'll be able to see Charlie Brown and Snoopy in 3D. And she looked at me and she said, I don't know who that is. I thought, who would have thought the day would ever come that a kid wouldn't know Charlie Brown and Snoopy?
That child's parents or grandparents have not done their job. If she did not know who Snoopy and Charlie Brown
they
was.
must have left her on her own.
She should at least be watching the Charlie Brown Christmas.
Yeah. But, kids, they don't watch that unless their parents or grandparents sit them down and make them watch it.
Right.
It's not something they're just going to discover on their own.
That is true. I've got a 7-year-old, but we have sat her down, and she's watched all the old Christmas specials.
That's good.
So you got to keep that going,
Yeah. You're familiar with the one, the Santa Claus is Coming to Town.
Yep.
Where Kris Kringle marries Miss Jessica, the school teacher.
Right, yeah.
Miss Jessica was a really good friend of mine.
Yeah, yeah.
Roby Lester was her name. She had that beautiful, beautiful singing voice. Of course, she did a lot of work for Disney Records. But after Roby died, her daughter sent me it's a plaque of an award Roby got from one of the groups in Los Angeles for her contributions to the musical history. And so in the museum, I have that plaque with a little stuffed Miss Jessica sitting next.
Oh, that's really cool.
That's like my little tribute to Roby because we were so close.
Well, see, and there's no telling what you might find when you go to the Hollis Museum. And don't forget, this weekend is an open house. It's $5 per person to go through and tour the museum. How long does it take somebody to go through if they're just casually walking through the museum?
I have had people that have rushed through it in 30 minutes or so, but the record time that I've had anyone spend was 3.5 hours.
Wow, yeah.
So it kind of depends on how much you want to take it all in. But we start at 10 o'clock on Saturday, and we go until noon, and then we close for an hour and a half so that we have a chance to have lunch.
Right.
And so it would kind of be best if people could be out of there by noon, and then they can come back at 1:30 and then finish it. They can stay the rest of the day if they want to.
Right, yeah. Well, and there's so much stuff in there that people will want to see and take their time as they go through to process those memories that they might have.
I always hear people say, no matter how many times I go to it, I still see something I didn't see before. And I said, me too.
Yeah.
I said, it's my house, and every time I walk in there, I see something I don't remember.
Right. It's like a good movie. When you watch it over and over, you pick out something new about it you like every time.
That's right. But I mean, I can't remember everything that's in there. Everything that's in the museum is in a database in my laptop, and I keep a printout so that if I'm traveling and I find something and I can't remember whether I have it or not, I can go out to the car and look at the database, the printed database, and see. But I think that database right now it's approaching 26,000 entries in it.
Wow.
So that's why I can't keep it all up here.
Yeah, definitely. Now, what do you think is the rarest item you might have?
Well, it would have to be the one-of-a-kind items like the moose from the Enchanted Forest and things like that, because, I mean, that's not the kind of thing that I have to remember whether I have it or not.
Right.
There's a light fixture from one of the old KFC locations, not the one here in Jasper, but back when they had the chandeliers with the big ceramic buckets with a light in each one of them.
Yeah.
I have one of those, and I got it from a KFC that was being remodeled back in the 80s. I have one of the fixtures from one of the Popeyes fried chicken places where it was like simulated stained glass with Popeye and olive oil and sweet pea on there. So
I'm sure you've got to have some Jack's memorabilia.
Yeah. Now, the memorabilia that relates to Birmingham and this local area, that's kind of in a different part of the museum, but I'll let people see it if they ask about it.
Right.
But that's sort of in what I call the library part of the house. Because I get a lot of visitors from all over the country. There's a lot of people who come to visit the museum who aren't necessarily interested in Birmingham or Walker County.
Right.
So that's why that stuff is separated from all the rest. But I'm glad for people to see that too.
Oh yeah, and for us locals, that would definitely be an area that people would want to check out for sure.
That's right.
Well, Tim, I sure do appreciate you coming by this morning to talk about the museum and your memories in life in East Walker County, and you're a lot like me when you said that your family shopped in the Birmingham area.
That's right.
I remember as a child growing up in East Walker, we would go to Birmingham more than we went to Jasper.
Yeah.
And it was a local phone call to Birmingham, and it wasn't to
That's
Jasper.
right.
You know?
Well, you see that shopping center across the street from me, that was built when I was 5 years old. And we just thought we were in heaven because all of a sudden we didn't have to go to Birmingham to go to the grocery store.
Right.
Because we had Bruno's, we had Bargain Town, we had Big B Drugs, we had Ben Franklin's 5 and 10, we had Western Auto, we had Jack's.
Yeah.
You know,
So you didn't have to go anywhere.
Everything was right across the street in what had been a field up until then.
Right. Wow, that would be.
I still remember when it was under construction. We
Yeah.
would walk, my mom and my grandmother and I would go walking over the construction site and looking at the wooden stakes that were in the ground that were marked Bruno's, Bargain Town. Oh, this is where Bargain Town's going to be.
Yeah.
Bargain Town, USA. Cha,
See,
cha, cha.
I worked at Bargain Town as a high schooler and right out of high school at the one on the Summerton side.
Yeah.
And I still have the clucking chicken.
Oh,
You
yeah.
put the quarter in and it would
Right.
turn around.
Yeah.
It was broken, and I got it when
You
I
have the
worked
whole
there.
machine?
I have the whole machine.
I have the Fred Flintstone version of
Oh,
that.
I love the Flintstones.
I've got the Flintstone machine.
Wow,
yeah.
that's neat. Well, Tim, thank you again for coming by. We're getting close to the 10 o'clock hour, and at 10, that's when the professor of rock and roll takes over here on WJLX. Woody Wilson will be here with his show up until 2 o'clock today. Tomorrow, Live at 9 will be back on Friday morning, and tomorrow's guest is Greg Ferris. He is he's running for mayor in Jasper. And so we want to talk to Greg and find out his reasons for running for mayor and getting all the information on him. So he'll be here at 9 a.m. in the morning to talk to me. And then next week we've got a full list of guests lined up for next week. So thank you guys for tuning in. You've made our show become quite popular in a short amount of time, and we appreciate that. Check us out on Facebook on WJLX's page, and also you can always listen to on the live stream on 101.5 WJLX 1015.com. Sorry.
People can find me on Facebook too. Just look under Tim Hollis.
That's right. Look under
There I
Tim
am.
Hollis, and you could check out Tim Hollis's Weird World, which I say is kind of like a mixture of Pee Wee's Playhouse and Cousin Cliff's show.
And plus some things you wouldn't even think about.
There you
So,
go. Well, all right. Thank you guys for listening. For our producer, Terrell Manasco, and for Tim Hollis, we'll see you next time.
Bye.